start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Amen. Blessed is the power that inspired our ancestors and brings us together in this moment for us to make ourselves busy studying words of truth, words of teaching, and words of wisdom together with one another as a community. Amen. First of all, I want to recognize and honor. I want to recognize and honor being with Risa Davids. Risa, it touches my heart to see you here in this group, and it's been just a delight to get to study with these smart individuals on a rare basis, and I've certainly been honored to study with you many times at your Shabbat table in the past, and so I'm excited to see you on this Zoom. So thank you for being here. When I last met with you, we were just starting the book of Deuteronomy. You've had a chance now for several weeks to be making your way through this long farewell address that Moses is delivering to the Israelites on the cusp of entering the promised land. The portion that we are in today, Ki Teitzei, is filled with laws. Actually, it has more laws in this Torah portion than any other Torah portion in the entire 5 books. And there's an interesting trick that's being done in this book in the way that these laws are being presented, because they're being presented by Moses to the Israelites on the cusp of entering the promised land. So in our imagination, this is taking place, 1200 BCE, 1500 BCE, sometime in the written past of our ancestors. And yet this is the legislation that we're meant to understand, not only guides us as our law code throughout the First Temple period when it's claiming it's going to be coming into use, but also seems to be the law code that we are meant to understand was actually the laws of the land during the Second Temple period. So in other words, the same laws that Moses is apparently giving the Israelites now are meant to endure for over 1,000 years of the various kinds of ways that the Israelites are going to be collecting themselves in the northern and southern kingdom, in the temple and without the temple, perhaps in and out of the land of Israel itself during periods of monarchy and not monarchy. And that leads me to wonder about the nature of this legislation that we're looking at in Deuteronomy. And this week's Torah portion has some rich examples that really, to my mind, help us get to the heart of the question of what exactly are these laws doing in the Torah? Who are they meant to be for? And I think an interesting question of, if we're going to hypothesize they didn't come directly from God to Moses on Mount Sinai, but there was some other, also potentially divine, historical process at work that involved other individuals, different periods of time, also acting as legislators, where exactly did those laws come from in the first place? And who enforced them? Like how were they meant to actually live in the lives of our ancestors? Yes, Steve.
I was going to say, I read a lot of these things, and they have to do with passing on some type of acquired wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And everything was passed on orally. It's kind of like an African tribe knowing what berries to eat and what berries not to eat. And I think by including them in the law that was read to everybody in the square twice a week, when you don't have textbooks, you're not going to elementary school, it was partly a way to pass on this wisdom. And at some level, since it has to do, even the mixing linen and wool or whatever, it's all has to do with something in nature. There is a divine element, even if it there's in some of it has to do with how people relate to one another, and the bird and the but a lot of it, it just seems to me, is wisdom, how to lead a good life, and it's put in the only place where people may take it seriously and learn these lessons.
I love that. So your hypothesis, which I think is e easily defensible, if we want to look, is that this is meant to be a wisdom tradition as much as it's meant to be an actual system of legislation. And so there is an element of how do we learn how to be human beings, Jewish human beings, and it's passed along orally. And this is the way that it's kind of given stature, is by its placement here in Deuteronomy. I love that. I think that that's a valid answer. I want to see if we can concretize it with the text that you kind of just alluded to a second ago, like in passing. And I want to see if there are other explanations that might sit comfortably side by side with that one, or if there maybe are other explanations that would feel like they're more in tension with what you just proposed. But I think that that's a very strong case can be made for that. Rebecca, and then David, and then let's look at a text to give us something to ground. Go
Um,
ahead, Rebecca.
the last time we had you, you said that King Josiah found Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy was lost. And I think, didn't you also say, at least that's what I wrote down, that Deuteronomy was redacted in exile. So if that is true, then a lot of this could have been added at that point.
So excellent. You're speaking to a more historical approach. What I shared last time is that according to the Bible itself, in 2 Kings, there is a story where King Josiah, we looked at it together last time, finds what seems to be the book of Deuteronomy, and all of the people are go into mourning and start obeying a new set of laws after Josiah reads it publicly to the people that hitherto the Israelites have not been following. Now, you can make a case, well, the book of Deuteronomy was part of what was given to the Israelites on Mount Sinai. These are oral traditions that were passed down from that period on. Or you might go in a different direction, which why don't I go there now? And then David, did you want to say a word?
I'll let you go on, please. I'm interested to hear what you and everybody has to say. Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we go down this path for a second? So one possibility, which I put forward last time, is that like other ancient Near Eastern kingdoms, the kings of ancient Israel and ancient Judah had laws that were necessary to govern the people of their kingdoms. This makes sense. And we actually can see many similarities in the law codes that are in Deuteronomy, in particular, to other law codes from other ancient Near Eastern sources. For example, the law codes of Hammurabi are probably the most famous, but we see them through texts that we have, existing texts written in other languages, like Ugaritic, from the ancient Near East. So they're not the only law code. There's also Egyptian law codes, for example. We see many similarities between some of the laws that are in Deuteronomy and laws that are in those codes, which leads many historians in particular, but other scholars, to conclude that at least some of these laws that we see in Deuteronomy, their first source may have not been theological, but may have been practical. The king says, I am your king. Here is what you must do as my subjects in my kingdom. Over time, this changes to be, God says, these are the laws that we must obey in order to live in a healthy society with one another. That wouldn't explain all of the laws that are in the code, as we're about to see, and as Steve alluded to, but it does explain many of the laws. Howard, give me 1 second. I want to make one point, and then I'll come to you. For example, laws on slavery. Those aren't going to be individually mandated. You're going to need for slavery a national system in order to work it. So there are laws regulating how slavery looks. It's kind of painful for me to say this out loud in this way, but our ancestors had legislation around owning slaves, just like they themselves saw themselves as having descended from slaves. They had laws regulating slaves. It is interesting that while in many ancient Near Eastern legal traditions there are laws around slaves, the Hebrews seem to be giving a basis in their own history of having been slaves for ethical treatment of slaves. So you're not allowed to treat your slave however you want because you yourself were a slave in Egypt. Now, is that something that arises out of an actual recollection of slavery, or is that something that was later on added in order to support an ethical basis? We have no real way of knowing, but it does distinguish Hebrew law from many of the other laws that existed in the ancient Near East regulating slavery, and in particular, regulations that relate to treatment of women and children, and that relate to length of tenure of a slave, slaves being allowed to rest on Shabbat. These are the kinds of things that are in Deuteronomy and could be evidence of a society that's looking for an ethical and theological underpinning to religious law, to secular law, sorry. Howard, go ahead. And then David, if you still want to come in, jump in.
Well, when you bring up these other documents, like the Ugaritic, I always try to remind myself that as far as I know, that these things were not known at all until fairly recently in history. And for example, a Levitical commentator didn't know any of these documents. Put that in perspective of how they view this and how we view this writing.
Yes, absolutely. When we look at the ancient commentators, they seem not to have been as aware of other law codes as we are now. Many of the things that we are familiar with were discovered only in the 20th century, were findings that really started to come out during the Zionist era when there was an increased interest in and availability of texts from the ancient Near East, and archaeological evidence started to come to the fore. And from the 19th century, when religious texts like these, in particular by Protestant scholarship, were seen to have valence in terms of understanding the story of Jesus Christ and the meaning of the New Testament. Okay, David, go ahead.
Oh, I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to turn our attention to Deuteronomy 22. We're going to look very briefly at verses 1 onward, but we're really going to focus in on one particular text. Would it be helpful if I shared screen? Would anybody appreciate that? Everybody has a text in front of them that you're comfortable with? Okay. Can I ask someone to read for us Deuteronomy 22:1, the very first verse in this chapter, part of this week's Torah portion? Thank you, Rebecca.
I don't have Jewish text. It's the Oxford Annotated Bible. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and withhold your help from them. You shall take them back to your brother.
Can you put that in your own words?
If your brother's or your neighbor's ox is wandering out in the street, you should help and return it.
Okay. What do we think about this piece of legislation? What's your take on it? Steve?
Well, that it's not
go
even
ahead,
if it's not your property, you're still responsible in some fashion due to the fact that you've seen this animal wandering.
Okay, so you have a responsibility for your neighbor's properties. Steve? Oh, Steve, you're muted, Steve.
I think it also undermines the notion that possession is 9/10 of the law. Um, you can't take it as your own property if you know whose it is. And in fact, I think later on we discover you need to make an effort to find out whose it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's actually in the text here or if that's later on in the law codes that derive from this in the Mishnah and the Gemara, but you're right that that is what ends up happening. Um, and clearly there is, I think you could argue from what Steve is saying that there's a basis in thou shalt not steal that ends up bringing us to this particular perspective. David, did I see your hand up?
Yes, this also goes along with finders keepers. So just because you may find some property of someone else doesn't mean that you can keep it. So there's a legal aspect actually that's technically the law today in many states, including California, but without going into details. But it's there's the ethical part of it too, is some of you mentioned.
Okay, so Steve introduced us with the ethical notion of this, but let's stay on the point that David is raising here. Let's talk about the legal aspects of this. Could you picture a lawsuit arising that somehow would be resolved on the basis of this law here? Could something come up? Could neighbors like be in a conflict and say we need to bring this to the judge? Could that happen? Is there such a scenario? Rebecca, go ahead.
Well, yes, because the sheep or the oxen cost money. They're
And so,
valuable.
for sure. So
They have
play it out for me. Like, what would happen? What would it look like? Let's say you were the plaintiff. What would the story be?
the story would be that like David said, my property was taken from me. My property is of value. It adds worth to me and my family. It provides food on the table, whatever.
All right. So David,
It's a source of income for my family, and it's been taken away now.
all right. You recognize that ox that fell down, that on the side, that ox that's wandered off on the side of the road, as seems to be in David's possession all of a sudden. And David, what do you say when you've got this ox now? What's your case there?
My case is that I had 10 oxen in my stable or wherever you keep oxen, and I only have 9 of them now. So one of them wandered off, and I believe that the one Rebecca has, the one she found, is mine.
Absolutely. Okay. So each of them is now like saying like, well, you've got my ox, I've got your ox, that's mine. And there's a question of property here. So what happens? You have to take it to a judge. By the way, what would have happened in ancient Israel? What do we think would have then happened? Like if such a case came up? Do you have any sense of like how would this actually have been arbitrated?
Sure.
What would happen, Steve?
I think, and they had a hierarchy before it would ever get to Moses, but you went to your tribal leader with your dispute first, and he would make a decision.
Okay, so you're giving us the we're wandering in the desert story. Take us forward another 500, 700 years to when we're actually living in the first temple period, the second temple period. How are disputes like this getting arbitrated?
I assume they went to the priest.
Interesting. Okay, Rebecca, what do you think?
Well, I think another point can be made too, that the owner of the oxen was irresponsible. If the oxen wandered away, the owner has a responsibility to make sure that oxen or sheep does not wander away. If the oxen or the sheep broke through a fence because the fence was in ill repair, then it would be the original owner's problem that they were not responsible to keep that oxen or sheep within the enclosure of their property.
Okay, Rebecca, you are thinking like a rabbi now. This is the entire reason why this isn't all we have, right? This is why the Mishnah comes into existence and then the Gemara comes into existence, because the rabbis realize that this isn't enough of a law code to arbitrate in every case. And actually, there's a quote just a few sentences later that you could use in kind of like comparative legal tradition to say, but there's another example here that ought to apply here. Would someone read to us verse 8, which actually supports what Rebecca is proposing here? Thanks, Risa.
When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it.
Risa, how would you put that in your own words?
You are responsible for the safety of anyone who might wander up on your roof.
Right? You've got a job to build the fence on your roof. If someone falls off your roof, you can't say,
your
well,
fault.
what are they doing on my roof? It's my fault. So how would that apply to Rebecca's case that she just suggested that like you should have had a better fence? It makes sense, right? You could see like that
Well,
there's you could make an analogy to it. So the Torah
Well-
itself, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I disagree a little bit in the sense that you might be at fault if your ox goes out and gores someone walking along the road for your negligence. It's still, and in fact, that is a basis of it being your property, not someone who may have seen it on the road. I think there are two different things at work and it's context dependent. I don't think that the fact that you were a little negligent in letting it go astray means you gave up your property rights. But it does mean you might be liable for any damage done by the animal that escaped due to your negligence.
Oh, interesting. Wonderful. David.
Yes, I agree with Steve's distinction, but then and then also this section, the first one that was read, said, "If you shall find, the ox, return it to your brother." So that doesn't indicate whether negligence of the brother in having the gate unlatched and the ox left or whatever. It just means if you lose it, if you're walking, if you're in a store and you find somebody's diamond ring. So that doesn't mean you can keep it. I mean, if somebody's ethical, so you found the person's ring, and I think when it says brother in this, I think it just means a fellow Jew, not necessarily a blood brother. So you
Agreed.
find someone's diamond ring in Nordstrom's and you don't just put it in your pocket or purse, it's someone's, and whether they were negligent or not in washing their hands in the bathroom and it fell off and they didn't notice it or whatever, it still belongs to them, so you have to return it. And so what would happen, so if I recall, and I don't know if this is the 500 years after you mentioned, when Moses was determining all of the disputes and his father-in-law said, "You're going to get a heart attack doing all this. You're going to get stressed out. You have to appoint people, magistrates, in order to deal with the lesser issues." So if that's the case, then he appointed lesser, people to take care of it, whether it was tribe elders or somebody else. I don't know the historical part, and they would hear the dispute. And so Rebecca and I would come into the court and determine if it was my ox number one. If it wasn't, then end of story. If it was, then I still think that I would be able to get it back. So I think that's the procedure part of how it would go forward. And then just one small side note, when you mentioned that this code can't take care of every single issue that comes up, that's like our law, the English common law as well. There's no specific law that governs every factual case. They have general things and you apply the facts to each case that comes up. So these are very good. I guess there's ethical guidelines of it, religious guidelines of it, and divine guidelines for them.
Beautiful. All right. Mara, Brad, I'm going to come to you in just a second. So what we're having here is what I would call a Talmudic discussion. This is exactly what the rabbis are doing in the Mishnah and then doing in the Gemara, commenting on the Mishnah. You kind of do it with a voice like this, right? If the person shows up with the ox and it's like a fence, as you heard in this verse here. No, an ox is not like a fence because a fence doesn't have the ability to think and an ox has freedom of will. So it's not like that. And I've got a text that supports that as well. And the rabbis argue like this back and forth, saying, here's a text that supports my way of looking at it. And then someone else says, no, here's a text that supports my way of looking at it, and becomes case law. And then that becomes the Mishnah and the Gemara, which we call the Talmud. Then we're talking now in the 5th century to the 8th century of the Common Era is when this is getting codified. The Mishnah in 200, the Talmud 5th century and onward. Then over the 1,000+ years since then, you have commentaries for specific cases that couldn't have been figured out. Let's say, are you allowed to use electricity on Shabbat? Are you allowed to get on a bus on Shabbat if the bus is already driving anyway, or is that breaking Shabbat? Is a food that didn't even exist in our imagination back in the days of the Bible kosher or not kosher? There's no way that the Bible can legislate for this. So we have to have rabbis who are legislative authorities and have authority within their community to say, this is how we're going to understand the application of this law. And to go to just the other point briefly of how would this have been legislated in biblical times, meaning during the era of the First Temple period, the Second Temple period, absolutely there were legislatures for bigger cases, but for the kind of case like this, let's say it's between Rebecca and David, they would bring their case to the city gates, and there would be either one or more wise elders or judges who would be there at the city gate arbitrating cases all day long. These would happen at the gates of the city, is in the Bible in many places reported as where these discussions were happening and these decisions were being made. It's not entirely clear whether they were tribal elders, whether they were judges who roamed from town to town, like we understand Samuel does. In the books of Samuel, he's described as doing that, going from one place to another and kind of arbitrating cases there. It probably varied from location to location and over the course of the 1,000-year period that we're describing. So whatever's captured in the Bible isn't going to encompass the totality of how this worked. But for sure, there would also be, if you broke a crime that was, something that the king and the court was interested in, there would be an entire legal system that would be supporting what was happening, and with prisons and guards and all the kinds of things that we would imagine, just like there were in ancient Egypt. When Joseph got thrown into prison, there would have been similar sorts of things in ancient Israel. Okay, let's go back to Mara and then Brad, and then I'm going to give you a very confusing text that we're going to see. We're going to try and puzzle out, what are we going to do with this one? Okay, Mara.
I just wanted to say that given the time of year, that
Mara, you muted yourself while you were speaking.
sorry, that given the time of year, in terms of talking about returning things, that Maybe you should just let Brad talk.
Okay, I
Sorry.
I kind of am imagining I know where you're going, but I'm not sure if I am. But I want to take your time, and if you want to make the point at any point over the remainder of our time together, I think we'd all like to hear it.
Well, let
Okay.
me try right now. The terms of return, um, there are things spiritually that we need to find that need to be returned to us in terms of relationships with others.
Beautiful. So we're now hearing a third different purpose for these texts, right? We have the first one that Steve kind of presented, which is that there's an ethical system that's at play here. Maybe this is how you build the culture of a community or of a people, is by having a common sense of what's right and wrong. Then we have David's kind of pushing us towards, well, we have to think about the practicalities. Like there's law, and there's a reason why we need to like have certain rules for how the society is going to operate. And now you're giving us a third kind of direction to look at, which is that there's a metaphoric level that we need to be looking at these laws and say not only about cases the way that they're describing it, it's a second way of reading them, going deeper into the text to understand how they actually are mapping out onto our own lives. And the way that the language is being used is meant to be a metaphor for how we should understand our own journeys of spiritual growth. Brad?
Yeah, to me, the operative word here in what we read is do not ignore. And this reminds me, of course, of the story of the Good Samaritan in the New Testament. And we're getting to the heart of the issue here is one of intent. What was going through the head of the person who saw it or didn't see? Because that would be his claim. He would say, I didn't see it. I didn't notice it. I walked right by it. My mind was on something else. I didn't see it. So this points to the ultimate fallibility of human judgment. The only true judgment is divine judgment. Human judgment is fallible because we don't know, and we can never know what somebody's intent is.
Exactly.
I love that. You're giving it not only a theological overtone, but also a psychological overtone here, that there's an internal, I think, Steve, you maybe use the word teaching to kick this all off. There's a way that the Bible is trying to teach us about ourselves and how we should be in the world. So just as Mara is suggesting that there's a way that we should be thinking about teshuvah, return at this time of year, and not look at the ox only as returning an ox to a neighbor, but how should we be returning to ourselves? Brad, you're suggesting that ultimately those kinds of laws can only be understood if we think about them as having elements to them that can't be arbitrated in a society or by human judges, can only be understood by laws of the heart or of a higher power. And that is going to take us exactly to the text that I want to present to you for this week. Steve, you muttered it under your breath, so I'm going to bring it for everyone here. This is verses 6 and 7 of our current chapter, Deuteronomy 22. Is there someone who would like to read this entire passage aloud? It takes up 2 verses. Many of these are pithy and are 1 verse long. This one's a little bit longer, 2 verses long. Maybe someone who hasn't read, who has the text in front, would like to feel bold and add their voice into the conversation. Okay, go ahead, David.
So this is still Deuteronomy 22, verses 6 and 7, yes?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and I'm reading from the Stone edition, which was the only one I was able to find for purchase a number of years ago. And anyways, if a bird's nest happens to be before you on the road, on any tree on the ground, young birds or eggs, and the mother is roosting on the young birds or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely send away the mother and take the young for yourself, so that it will be good for you and you will prolong your days.
Okay. Now that's what we're going to talk about for the remainder of our time together, is these two verses. Can you put what you just read into your own words there, David? What's the law here?
Well, it's to respect life and the mother-child relationship. Don't just, if you find a young one, the mother roosting on the young birds or eggs, then don't take the mother away, because the mother has to be with the young one. So it's showing a respect, reverence for life, and ethical guidelines for how to deal with life, not only humans, but animal life, and not even a mammal, but a bird.
Okay, I'm good. I might tweak your summary just a little bit, but let me see if Howard's going to do that. Howard, you're muted though.
It's enlightened, but it isn't that enlightened. I mean, don't take the mother, but take the birds. That's pretty awful.
Okay, so right, that's the tweak that I was going to make. You do get to take the young, the fledglings in my text, the young birds, and the eggs. You can take them, but don't take the mother bird. Okay? It's a little bit of a weird law, I think. Am I the only one who thinks that that's a little bit of a weird law? I think it's a little bit weird. Like the ethics seem a little bit confusing to me. But the main point I want, oh, okay, Marina, go ahead.
Well, I think it reflects the psychology of a person on the road in the time of scarce, and they need to eat. So they grab whatever they see is there. Letting mother go prolongs the line. Letting mother go allows her to procreate again. But the hungry person who stumbles upon the nest can still eat.
I love that. You're giving thought to the question of intention that came up here. Why would this person even be doing this in the first place? And I love that you're bringing in an explanation. The person's hungry, they need to eat. And I love the notion that if the mother stays alive, then she can have more eggs in the future. If you were to leave the eggs by themselves and the fledglings on their own, then they would also presumably, without their mother to defend them and care for them, you'd be wiping out the entire family. So there is a sensitivity there. Thank you for naming that. Brad?
Yeah, Rabbi, I'm going to make the point that I made yesterday at Torah Study, which is last week we learned about the laws of siege. And if you siege a property, you are not supposed to take an axe to the fruit trees, because those fruit trees in the future can bear additional fruit. And this is the same moral, the same message, except with birds. It's that mother that can bear additional, fruit, additional children in the future. So it's a repetition of that same argument that was used for the siege, and not taking an axe to the fruit tree.
Very similar argument. I love that you're bringing in that parallel text from another portion in Deuteronomy. And clearly, we in living in cities and urban environments, we have a sense that birds, donkeys, oxen, trees, how does that even relate to our lives? But of course, for the ancient Israelites that were living in very agricultural communities, even the city dwellers, the urban Israelites, had a much closer relationship to the earth than we do today. Just like I would say many contemporary Israelis do in comparison with many Jews who live in big cities in the United States. Their birds and trees are much more part of their daily life. Steve and then Cindy.
I think this if you want to look more at your metaphor and look at this in terms of people, it highlights the difference, in a sense, between Jews and Catholics and why some Jewish obstetricians won't deliver babies in Catholic hospitals. Because if there's a choice between saving the mother and saving the child, we save the mother. In Catholic doctrine, you save the child and let the mother die. And and again, this ties into the mother may have other children, may be able to have other children in the future, has already a role in society and in the family and the community that you need to respect. Whereas the unborn child or almost born child is not that established, not that anybody wants to see that life extinguished, but when you have a choice, that's the choice you make, and we have to revere the parent.
It's a powerful analogy. Thank you for sharing that. I've never connected that to this portion before. Cindy and then Panina.
I understand the logic behind sending the mother away because the mother can produce others. But my commentary says that this is humane to send the mother away so the mother doesn't see you taking away the eggs or the fledglings. But in my mind, the mother still comes back to this empty nest and doesn't know what happened. And it's still a difficult situation for the mother.
Yes, I also am somewhat troubled by the ethics in this particular passage. I think I've heard some good arguments for why, if you are yourself starving, your needs are now the ones that we're going to need to take care of. And so what's the best you can do in this bad situation? But I hadn't thought of it that way before. Marina brought that up, and Cindy, like you, I'm kind of troubled by this text on its face value and how it's presented. Panina?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I have a problem with the whole thing because we started regarding property. Whose property? If the nest is not even in your property, I don't think that they should touch it because that person might be raising them for a living, or that may be his source of nutrition, and it's only for his. And again, the idea that it's so vague and where it is and what sometimes could be very harmful to a person who is not educated and maybe may try to put like ifs and like presenting a situation where it would be permissible or not permissible. I think if it's not on your property, you just don't touch it. And if you
Okay.
say and if you say and like I said, today we are living in a world that everything is exposed. Everybody can get in online and everybody can listen to what we say. And we have to be very careful about putting boundaries on things that might be not acceptable to somebody else that doesn't study Torah and that doesn't get this permission from the elderlies or from the people that are supposed to be the surveys to tell them that this is okay and this is not. While the whole thing in my book, if somebody would come to my property and would take a bird, I have hummingbirds and I put things with honey for them to come and eat. I wouldn't want anybody coming there and taking the eggs or whatever if it's not his property, no matter if it's the mother or the children. It's just not supposed to be there. He's not
Yes.
supposed to get in
Okay.
there and take anything. So
Yes.
we are giving him permission to people to just pass by and take, but leave the mother? No. So I think that what we are trying to teach from the rabbis, it's very much depends on the era that they wrote it, what it is that they really saw. Did they even see a bird in a nest in the tree where they were living and they wrote those nests, those laws? We have to be very careful of who we're quoting, where was he, and how he was doing. I'm totally think that they are very smart and they thought about situations, But again, I'm saying with bringing the Mishnah and bringing the Talmud, they present different times, and they came from people who lived in different times. So it's very, very dangerous on our part to say that this is okay and this is not.
Okay.
So I'm not
So
saying that we're not supposed to bring
Panina,
them,
can I just pause you there, because I think
but I am very
you've made the
touched by
point.
it and disturbed by it because people can understand it today in a different way that we do, because they
Agreed.
may not agree with us, period, end.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So I want to say two things in response to that, because I think it's great and you're taking us exactly where I wanted the conversation to go. The first is, on the face of it, I think that the law is saying, and Marina, you posted this in the chat, if along the road, baderech, you chance upon a bird's nest. So I think on the face of it, the way that it's saying is you're journeying between towns where there isn't a property. So it's clear that this is now the public space. But even if you're going to say, okay, so on your basic point, we're not actually stealing it from another person, there's still the deeper question that you're raising, which is, but is it even ever okay? Like, are you stealing from the environment? Are you doing something that no human should be allowed to do in the first place? Like, how do we interpret? And clearly, like, we don't have to look at birds for this. We could be looking at laws around slavery to ask the question of how can we reconcile the fact that our ancestors have a different ethical understanding than we might today. So I want to give a very brief response to that, then I want to actually take us, because I see our time is running out, to kind of the main question I want to ask you about this. Even in the Bible itself, there are laws that by the earliest era of the Mishnah, the rabbis were interpreting exactly the opposite of the way that it's written in the Torah, or saying this law was never actually applied. For example, there's laws about stoning your own children when they misbehave, or they are disrespectful. According to the earliest sources of rabbinic commentaries, the rabbis say this never happened. No, this law was never applied. And so there was already, like, we look at these texts with discomfort now, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 years later. That's a long period of time. These are some of the oldest existing law codes in the world. How could they possibly still be applied in the same way in our times without interpretation? And I'm telling you that even 2,000 years ago, already people were discomforted by some of these texts and looking for different interpretations. So I think that that goes to Panina's main point. But I want to, Panina, with your permission, I'm going to take us in a different direction, which is in that first text about the ox and the sheep that are going astray, we could see what would be the legal case that could happen there. What's the legal case that could actually apply here? You're on the road, you see a bird's nest. Like, are we picturing that there's like people with binoculars hanging out in the forest waiting to catch you to see if you're doing this? Like, clearly, there's no applicability to this law. There's no way that this could actually be enforced. There's no, are we imagining if there's like groups of school kids who are coming up behind you and saying, aha, citizens arrest. We saw you doing that with the birds.
With marshlands, endangered species, there's all kinds of contexts in which these things might be preserved and there could be a legal dispute. Maybe not a robin on Wilshire Boulevard, but certainly a pelican in a marshland or the wetlands or...
Agreed. So, Steve, I agree with that, but I think that that fits into the question of how are we using biblical law as a basis for the way we would be thinking about law nowadays, right? That's using it as a basis, and it's the commentary process and the process over the course of centuries of thinking about how might these laws inspire how we approach contemporary situations. I'm referring to, if we're taking this law on face value, how can we understand it? Seeing that it's 12:55, I'm going to apologize and I'm going to kind of give you my take on this. And then if you would like, we can have some time after 1 o'clock for people to share more about their own views. My impression is that this speaks to the point that we raised earlier, that many of these laws are meant to be more psychological or cultural than they're meant to be legislation that were enforceable by a king or by a judge. This kind of law is speaking to what's the way that we should be thinking about situations like this, whether it's, as Steve is pointing us towards, for human mothers and the children that are in their unborn in their womb, or as you again pointed us towards, to like wetlands and current encounters, or as Panina was speaking to, about greater sense of environmental responsibility. While the laws in Deuteronomy, clearly some of them have an actual origin and purpose in creating a society that we can imagine functioning in a certain way under those laws 2,500 years ago, these laws, like this one and many others, seem to be meant to truly be intended to be timeless, as a way of understanding what does it mean to be Jewish in comparison with people of any other nation, whether in the ancient world or in modern times. These pieces that you're going to see throughout Deuteronomy, including in the coming remaining weeks of studying this text, would have been a way for people who considered themselves part of the Israelite community, whether they were in the northern kingdom of Israel or the southern kingdom of Judah, to say, we have something in common, a common ethical basis. And that I think would, for those of us today, whether we're in Los Angeles or New York City, whether we consider ourselves Reform Jews or Orthodox Jews, to say we have a common ground upon which we can make ethical arguments about what it means to distinguish ourselves as Jews from other people and why that distinction is necessary. So I'm going to pause our conversation here so that we can conclude before the hour with our recitation of Mourner's Kaddish. And then I'll leave the Zoom open for a few more minutes for those of you who want to stick around to continue this conversation. But I want to thank you all for engaging with me in this study of Deuteronomy. I will be returning in October. I think mid-late October, I'll be seeing you again. And then November, and I hope December as well. We're trying to make sure that I'm seeing you monthly. I hope you'll continue to want to see me. I'm excited to be moving into the books of Genesis together with you. I'm looking at some real narratives and moving away from legislation to the stories that I think inspire us in the same way. How do we know who we are? And especially as we're moving into this period of the high holidays, as we were talking about earlier, as Mara was raising, for us to look at these as operating on a level of what are the teachings for our heart that these are meant to be doing, not just the teachings for how should we be intellectually responding with one another. Okay, so I thank you all. I'm going to read off to you all the names on the Kaddish list, and then we'll rise and say Mourner's Kaddish together. Rise if it's your tradition. So those who've passed away during the past month: Merrick Bob, Burton Allen Ehrlich, Susan Frankel, Rachel Feigelben, Marcia Dicko Greenberg, Bernard Gevin, Anita Mason, David Stockhammer, William Wolf Fisher. I'm so sorry for the loss of all of those individuals. And these are the yard sites that we're calling to name from the past week: Ida Applebaum, Moretta Bach, Rita Tapper Balliet, Sylvia Band, Francis Brody, Joel Brooks, Mildred Chanis, Ruth Cheslaw, Joan Kellner Cohen, Milton Cole, Beverly Cooperman, Shirley Ann Danneman, Ida Dischel, Shelley Ellenson, Ruth Epstein, Robert Friedman, Edna Freeling, Fred First, Hyman Gartzman, Ethel Geffner, Harold Gelman, Miriam Goldberg, Zev Goldfarb, Glenn Goldstein, Irving Grauer, Gloria Gray, Sophie Greenberg, Eric Jonathan Hammermesh, Ronald Hirschhorn, Joseph Hurwitz, Dale Cass, John Kim, again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any names, Rosalind Krasnow, Layla Kreider, Irene Krell, Hugo Kren, Margot Hyman Lansing, Samuel Levitas, Howard Lynn, Michael Met, Ida Meyerson, Mel Michaels, Mary Marina, Jared Morris, Larissa Muravina, Mark Norotsky, Molly Becker Redman, Ronald Rubin, Lisa Rosen, Anna Rosenthal, Paula Rottenberg, Ethel Ruvelson, Philip Ruvelson, Loretta Safro, Rose Beline Saperstein, Sam Schwartz, Leah Serlin, Leon Sharp, Yuli Scheinberg, Sadie Shub, Jacob Schumann, Erwin Siegel, Philip Silver, Jacob Silverstein, Lucille Small, Millicent Small, Bobby Solomon, Florence Solomon, Ann Spielberg, Jonathan Spound, Jeffrey Stahl, David Steiner, Sylvia Stock, Shirley Turtle, Chaki Walensky, Gordon Wintraub, Bennett Wolf, Ida Zivitz, Philip Zivitz, and Florence Zucker. Is there anyone who wishes to add a name at this time?
Sally Harris, my childhood friend mother, died yesterday.
I'm so sorry, Rebecca.
Okay, can we talk about what it is that you gave us permission to talk about for 2 minutes?
We're going to say the mourner's Kaddish first, and then I'll open it up for discussion.
All right.
Okay, if it's your custom, please join me. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemirah v'yamad divrach rutev v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayachol v'yomcha v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael agla v'zman hariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba divrach la'olam la'amei amaya. Yitbarach v'yitkabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shemei d'kudesha barich hu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata da'amiram be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen.
Amen.
May the source of peace send peace and comfort to all of us who are grieving in our communities and throughout the world. And let us say together, Amen.
Amen.
Amen.